Hi guys, going to try to do a quick little lecture here for you guys on the Native American movement. Now, first thing to realize about the Native American movement is that it's probably one of the more sadder stories in American history. To completely understand it, you have to know about the history of when Europeans and white people came over to North America, because when they came over, Native Americans were already here. Okay, so when Christopher Columbus came in 1492, he came, bringing, hoping to find, a trade route to India, but instead, he accidentally found, parts of the Caribbean and eventually North America. And, all of a sudden, Europeans are starting to come there and explore and really claiming land as their own. But that land already belonged to people. Numerous and hundreds of different Native American tribes were already established. That was their home. That was their territory. And so there's conflict right away about who owned what, who would get what resources. Okay, and there's this perceived notion that the Europeans overpowered the Native Americans when in reality it was like 50-50 battles. Okay, but what really allowed the Europeans to win was not overpowering them with weapons and more disciplined soldiers and better warriors. No, in fact, if we look at here it was actually disease. Europeans for centuries grew an immunity to some of the most basic colds, sicknesses, diseases that they were able to, the common cold, it was nothing. They might be out a week. But to Native Americans, it was extremely deadly. Okay, and millions of Native Americans died over the next century or so. And that's what really allowed the Europeans and eventually the colonists and Americans to dominate North America over the Native Americans. Now, the Native Americans that did survive lead to what I would go to the second number here is war and broken treaties. Okay, now United States citizens and the Native Americans typically worked with each other with who had what land and who owned what territory. But throughout the years, it turned out that a lot of the Native American lands had resources that people from the United States desperately wanted. Okay, so the United States would break treaties, invade that territory, pull them from their lands, or even worse, cause a little war, and eventually push them off their land. So the United States broke a ton of different treaties throughout their history. Okay, they would push them off their land and usually put them to undesirable land. If you ever driven through Oklahoma, Nebraska, parts of Wyoming, or essentially any boring car ride is kind of where they would be like, oh yeah, go set up shop. Okay, but then hey, guess what? We found oil on your land. Hey, you have to move. Let's break another treaty while we're at it. So a lot of that history has led to a lot of anger amongst Native American tribes in American history, which would lead to major wars. Now, it eventually got to the point where the United States' technology and just sheer numbers of soldiers were just too much for Native American tribes. And that eventually led to the defeat of some of the major armies of Native Americans, which leads us to number 3. With the defeat of their major armies, it became a lot easier to control the Native American people, which here they have to start to assimilate to the American culture. They send thousands of young Native Americans to boarding schools, forcing them to forget about their way of life, culture, language, and their set of beliefs. Okay, and that left some damaging mental effects on those people as well as the Native American communities. All right, let's see how this works. I'm going to try sharing my screen during video. See how that works. All right, I hope you guys can see it. If not, type in the chat box, okay, and I will get out of surgery. Okay, I will tell the doctor I need to get out of surgery, and I will come and I will fix it. Okay, all right. Any problems? No. All right, let's move on here. So the Native American movement really started to gain steam along with the other movements in the 1960s. So some of the things that they wanted to do were to preserve. There we go. No, stop it. Stop it. There we go. Was to preserve Injunus traditions, and spiritual practices. It's hard to know, to define if Native American tribes have their own religion, but they have their own set of beliefs and spiritual practices, okay? And a lot of times it goes with this assimilation idea that they can't, they have to live the American way. They have to live, they have to practice Christianity, they have to speak our own language. They have to follow our own way of life, okay? But here, they want to preserve that. They want to preserve their own music, language, set of beliefs in their own territory, okay? These next two here, fighting for rights of Native Americans outlined in treaties and restoring treaties. There have been over 500 treaties made with Native Americans in American history, but unfortunately, the majority of them have been broken in some way or another. Okay, so here, a lot of these Native American groups want to preserve these treaties, such as who owns what land, okay, who can get access to that land, what are the rights of those Native Americans on those lands. In a lot of cases, those rights have been taken away from them, okay, which leads us to the next one, okay, to stop mining and pulling resources from their lands. Native Americans really love land, nature, and respecting it. That is part of their set of beliefs. Okay, they believe they are one with nature and they need to help protect it. And when you're pulling resources, destroying forests, land, it's against their set of beliefs. Okay, and it's also destroying resources that they vitally need for their own. So a lot of cases, businesses and governments come into their land, they pull out resources such as trees, water, in some cases oil, which is not good for their land. It's not good to live in those cases if they're doing oil, coal, and other things that they can breathe in. And these are things that are very important. You guys are going to watch a video right over to the right about the Red Power movement. And here they're specifically talking about Standing Rock, which has happened in the last 5 years or so, where Native Americans and other civil rights groups have gone there to help protect the land from oil companies drilling a pipeline through their land, disrupting ancestral burial grounds, which are extremely important to the Native Americans, okay? Now, educating public about prior injustices in history. I'd be very curious to see if you guys have heard of any wars that happened in 7th grade with Native Americans and how there have been numerous atrocities against Native American people committed by the US government and their military. Okay, and they just want to bring that out, bring notice of what happened to their people in previous generations. And then definitely for the last one here, if you're sports fans, okay, getting rid of sports mascots, okay? If you guys are familiar, you have the Washington Redskins who are getting their name. This one, it quite annoys me a lot because when people say, oh, it's the Redskins, how is that offensive? Well, Redskins is a slur used back in the 1800s and early 1900s. It's extremely offensive, okay? You also have the Chicago Blackhawks, which there have been some murmurings about them getting rid of their mascot. Nothing really in the works right now. You have the Cleveland Indians who have to get rid of their mascot after this year. I shouldn't say get rid of, they're changing it on their own. My old school, Carthage College, we used to be called the Red Men, okay? And they just recently changed their mascot name this upcoming year, okay? So what you guys need to do now is you guys need to watch the 2 videos to the right. The first video is the Red Power movement. It's about 3 minutes long. I'm going to be talking about the different things that the Red Power movement have done since the 1960s, such as the takeover of Alcatraz, Wounded Knee, and their current movement of Standing Rock. The bottom video here is a TED Talk, where she talks, the narrator talks about the different atrocities that have happened to Native Americans recently, and what they're trying to do about it. Extremely powerful speech that she gives there. And then when you guys are done watching both of those videos, it's time to pick your next leader, which is going to be a second video. Okay, second video that you guys need to listen to, where I describe those leaders and you guys select them. All right. So thanks for listening for another Mr. Stumenval chat. All right. Talk to you guys in a little bit. Stay classy. Bye.